All right, this should be a pretty short video. All right, but real quick, I want to go over Virginia Uniform Statewide Building Code. So, Virginia, as the name implies, has a uniform statewide building code. This is unlike, say, Maryland. Maryland has a building code for every county. Any county can put any code it wants. They can do anything they want. Some states are like Virginia. Some states are like Maryland. All right. So sometimes you have a code that is applied across the whole state, and other times you have every county can make its own rules as far as building code. All right. But Virginia, which is most applicable here, everything's the same throughout the state. Counties cannot do things differently technically. Now, there are a couple exceptions. One is counties can have their own particular requirements, especially if you get more than 5 foot outside of a building, where it applies to utilities and things like that. Counties make their own rules. And counties can make their own amendments to the building code if it's necessary, but they have to be able to provide you documentation on what their changes are from the building code. But for the most part, whatever can be done in Loudoun should be able to be done in Fairfax, should be able to be done in Alexandria, and if it's good in Alexandria, it should be good in Loudoun, should be good in Prince William County, and so on and so forth. Virginia has a uniform statewide code, and if any code official deviates from that statewide code, you can actually go to the Board of Contractors and file a complaint about them making you do something outside the scope of the code. That's not an easy process, but it can be done. So, the first thing you should understand is the Uniform Statewide Building Code, because that's where all our codes come from. So yes, we follow the International Mechanical Code when it comes to HVAC, or we follow the International Fuel Gas Code when it comes to gas. But that's only because the Uniform Statewide Building Code says so. So the Uniform Statewide Building Code is free. You get it online. So if you're looking at, say, Google, if you search Virginia Uniform Statewide Building Code, you will come up with the Department of Housing and Community Development's website. That is who puts out the Uniform Statewide Building Code. If you go to their page, they will have the current publications for the statewide building code. You can go to Code Collections, which references the Virginia codes. Actually, I'm not sure where this goes. Okay, yeah, it goes straight to the International Code Council, where you can buy the individual codes. All right, but what you're looking for generally is two things when you're talking about tradesmen. All right, when we're talking about the building trades, the 2015 Virginia Construction Code is what I generally call the Uniform Statewide Building Code, because that is what we're actually talking about. The existing building code and the maintenance code are good to look at too, but generally you're going to be looking at the construction code, and that's what we're going to talk about in a minute. And then especially I like to talk about the related laws package for a particular reason, but we'll get to that shortly. So anyway, if you click on this, it will open the Virginia Construction Code, Part 1 of the Uniform Statewide Building Code. Alright, so I'm going to switch to where I've already downloaded it right here. And we're going to talk about this for a couple minutes. Okay, the Uniform Statewide Building Code, or the Virginia Construction Code, alright, outlines everything that's as far as the building code. Here's the effective date. So the effective date of this building code was September 4th, 2018. This tends to be adopted every 3 years. I think they're behind this year. I don't know if we're going to get, they were actually a little bit behind with 2018, because it used to be about the middle of the year, if I recall, they would change this up. I don't know how often they do that. I haven't paid attention to enough Virginia code cycles to remember. but I could have sworn it used to be in like June or something. They changed it up for the first few cycles that I was licensed. But this one was in 2018, and something tells me we probably won't get a change until at least 2022, but I don't keep up with the changes well enough to tell you when you should expect a new one. Generally, on the Department of Housing and Community Development's website, they'll put out invitations to discuss adoptions of the new code. You can actually go to board meetings and things like that to discuss what changes should be made to the building code. That is a process you can get involved in. But in general, what happens is a new international code comes out. 3 years later, Virginia adopts it. So the 2018 building code is really 2015 international codes, and we'll see that down here in a second. But right now we are still governed under the 2018 Virginia Construction Code, or the 2015, Virginia Construction Code, which was adopted in 2018. So again, they named the year of the construction code, or the VA USBC, the same as the building codes that were adopted, and that is usually 3 years behind. So again, this was adopted in 2018, and it's the 2015 code. All right. And that's mainly because like I said, what happens is the new codes come out, and then they, over the course of a few years, they double check everything, have meetings, and decide what changes they want to make to the building codes to be adopted in Virginia. So they discuss all these things, and it's a long process. All right. So the most important things as far as mechanical is general, energy efficiency, and mechanical systems. That's the most important one. That's all we're really going to cover here. There are a lot of changes to the building code itself. I mean, it's not a super ton, but I mean, just the building code changes are probably 90% of this. So there's a lot of changes when it comes to the building code. The trades codes, like mechanical, plumbing, electrical, things like that, there's usually not so many, but there are a lot of changes in the building code itself. So first, talking about general changes, incorporation by reference. This is where we adopt. This is where they incorporate the building codes into the Uniform Statewide Building Code. So what this says is chapters 2 through 35 of the 2015 International Building Code, published by the International Code Council, are adopted and incorporated by reference to be an enforceable part of the USBC. That means anything that's in the International Building Code is incorporated into the Virginia Uniform Statewide Building Code, except as changed by this document. So if you only have the generic copy of the International Building Code, you have to reference the VA USBC with the building code to determine what's actually part of Virginia. But if you go to the Virginia codes on the International Code Council website, or better yet on UpCodes, which I'll show at another time, another video after this. But if you find the codes online, the Virginia codes online, it'll already incorporate all these changes. But if you don't, if you're referencing the generic international code, you need to look at what's incorporated in Virginia and what's incorporated by the international, what's just in the International Building Code. Chapter 1 is never incorporated by any jurisdiction. Chapter 1 of the international codes is all administration, and administration is done by the individual states. So almost every state just deletes Chapter 1. Chapter 1 is irrelevant in pretty much every building code. But chapters 2 through whatever are incorporated. A lot of times they don't incorporate the appendixes. Appendixes are usually not part of the code. So, they'll outline the actual chapters. And then by reference of by the building code, it references other international codes, and they get incorporated into the building code. And that is the plumbing code, the mechanical code, the fuel gas code, the energy conservation code, and the residential code. Notice that it's not the international electrical code that's incorporated. Pretty much every state follows NFPA 70, which is the national electrical code. So NFPA 70 is what we follow for electrical. We don't follow the international electrical code. NFPA kind of has a monopoly on the electrical codes. So even NFPA has their own set. They have the uniform plumbing code, they have the uniform mechanical code, and so on and so forth. A lot of states out west follow those, so they follow all the NFPA codes basically. But even in states that follow international codes, NFPA 70 ends up being the electrical code. So that's how that kind of works. And that's really all in general that's really important right now. There's a lot of other interesting information in here, but as far as application of the code and things like that, but not so relevant to our trade in particular. Okay, so real quick, I want to talk about the energy efficiency changes real quick. If you go into energy efficiency, there are some things that apply to us as mechanical contractors. Number one is if you're looking at envelope requirements for fenestration, there's a map of the climate zones. Ooh, and I forget which one we are. We're 4 or 5. I'm going to have to look at that map. I'm going to have to find it. But anyway, these are the minimum requirements for windows in the area. So you're generally going to see you have to meet these U factors and these U values, U factors and SHGC values for windows. Fenestration, remember, fenestration is just a fancy word for window. So this is the envelope requirements as far as U factors. So you can't put in windows or skylights or anything that don't meet these. So operable fenestration, I believe we're here at a 0.45 is the maximum U value. So you can have 0.45 and under, but not above that. Most people exceed this requirement, but that's the U value. As a matter of fact, most people end up shooting for 0.38, not the 0.45. Ceiling R values are 38. There's other stuff in here. And then where is it? Where is it? I don't think did I highlight it? There's a somewhere. Oh no, because it's actually in the energy conservation code. If you go to the energy conservation code, it gives you the minimum R factor for duct insulation, which is R8 in an attic, and I think R6 in a crawl space, and everywhere else there is none. But that's where you get R8 in an attic is the requirement for duct. And then the other changes that Virginia makes is for mechanical, right? On the energy conservation code is duct testing in Virginia is actually mandatory. So every duct is supposed to be tested on a residential application, or no, sorry, commercial application. No, this is residential. Duct testing is mandatory in all applications basically, but in residential you're supposed to test your ducts when for leakage after it's been installed on a new installation. This doesn't get enforced much, but technically you are supposed to always test the duct leakage. The exception is a duct air leakage report is not required on a final inspection if the air handlers and the ducts are entirely located within the thermal envelope. So if they're not in the attic, they're not in the crawl space, if they're all inside the building envelope, then then you don't have to test the ducts. But anytime you put a duct in an attic in Virginia, you're supposed to test it. So keep that in mind. I haven't seen any jurisdictions actually enforce this, but they could start doing so at any time. And I'm sure there are instances where they do. And a lot of contractors will make you do this anyway if you're doing a lot of track housing or something like that. But technically, you're supposed to always test your ducts if they're not inside the building envelope. And then this is where equipment and appliance sizing, they reference Manual S and Manual J. So if you followed my Manual J stuff, you know that I told you that it's part of the code. It's part of the code. So, our code book, isn't just as simple as the International Mechanical Code. Our code book is really the building code, the International Mechanical Code, actually think about it like this. Our code book is the VA USBC, which dictates everything else. And by that reference, we get the International Mechanical Code, the International Energy Conservation Code, ACA Manual S, ACA Manual J, ACA Manual D, and all that stuff. And then there's some other ones, some ASHRAE standards for commercial stuff. So, our code book isn't one book. Our code book is multiple books that you're supposed to understand. So that's energy conservation stuff. All right. The only time you don't have to follow Manual S is if you have variable speed systems and stuff and things of that nature, but you still have to make sure they're within the requirements of Manual S. Basically, you still have to make sure that the cooling and heating ranges fall within the capacities of the equipment. So that's that. And then mechanical systems. I highlighted a couple things here. They're not actually that important, but it's kind of interesting, right? So these are all the changes to the mechanical code. So anything it says here are changes that they make you make to the mechanical code. So the mechanical code is all incorporated into the Virginia Building Code except for these changes. Sometimes it adds a section, sometimes it deletes a section. Part of this is part of the building code, some of this is part of the gas code, but they're all incorporated as part of mechanical systems. So for instance, there's a section in the IBC about required heating in dwelling units. This gets added to it, so the heating facilities in a dwelling unit or a residential construction basically have to be able to maintain a room temperature of 65 degrees during the period from October 15th to May 1st from 6:30 a.m. to 10:30 p.m. of each day, and not less than 60 degrees during other hours when measured at a point 3 feet above the floor and 3 feet from the exterior walls. So a good application would be this, like for this would say you're renting a house. If the landlord doesn't have a heating system in there that can meet these requirements, they're in violation of the building code. And then there's other changes in here you should read. Usually I always reference the actual Virginia codes anyway when possible. I don't reference the generic international codes because it's better to just follow the Virginia code, because all these sections get added in there for you. But if you do have a generic code, then you want to look at the VA USBC and determine what changes there are, because some things get changed. All right, like here's some changes to Table 403. When we go over ventilation, there's some requirements in Table 403, and you have to add these requirements to them so that you know what the actual ventilation requirements are, and so on and so forth. So these are the changes to that code. Now, the most interesting thing for us as tradesmen, a little known fact to some people. The other thing you'll want to know is the related law packages. So in 2015, the Virginia Building and Fire Code Related Regulations, that's what this is. You'll want this related laws package because it has important information in here. It's not a lot. There's not ton of things you need to know out of this related laws package, but there are a couple interesting items. Here we go. It didn't want to load. Alright, so there's your table of contents. There's a bunch of stuff in here about solar equipment and things like that, and so on and so forth. Not too important. What I think anyway is interesting out of this related law package is the AE seal on drawings, and you want to know about the boiler and pressure vessel guide. So if we go to AE seals on drawings, you'll want to go to that section and then find chart C. These are the requirements for architects or engineer seals on drawings. And what this is for is, say you want to design a building yourself. You're a master tradesman. If you're a master tradesman and a contractor, then you can design the mechanical systems for some buildings yourself. It doesn't have to be done by an engineer, but there's certain things you need to know. So if this table, basically just look at this table. If this table says yes, then that means you have to have an architect's or engineer seal. If it says no, that means that you can design that building as a tradesman. And I think they changed this requirement, because I remember them always indicating it had to be an occupancy of less than 100 people, but now that's only for theaters. So basically you can design any building under 3 stories. That's for assembly, churches, business, factory or industrial, daycare, mercantile stores, basically residential storage or utility. You can design those buildings as a master tradesman. They don't need an engineer to do it. So if you're capable of following the requirements to design the heating and cooling within a facility, you can do so as long as the building is not one of these types. Theaters over 100 people, you can do theaters as long as it's less than 100 people. Alright. It's not educational, so you're not allowed to design schools. Can't be high hazard, so explosive materials and things like that. And institutional except group I4. Everything else you can design as a master tradesman and sign those drawings yourself, and there's no need for an engineer on that project. So this is what this table tells you. So if you ever need to know whether or not you can design a building without getting an engineer's stamp, then this is how you find out. In the related law package, it gives you this table to let you know what you can design. The other requirements, if you read through this, is that the mechanical systems can't exceed 125 psi other than refrigeration. So you can't design a boiler system that operates at 150 psi, and you can't have flue gases that exceed 300 degrees. You can't have temperatures other than flue gases which exceed 300 degrees. The work has to be designed and performed under the direct supervision of a person licensed as a master level plumber, master level HVAC worker, or a Class A contractor by written examination. So I've done this multiple times. I have actually done changes to drawings before and sent it in for approval when an engineer doesn't get something done quick enough and I want to get changes done. You can just basically design it yourself and send in the changes. A lot of smaller commercial buildings, nail salons or something like that, just do the mechanical design on it. No big deal. Alright, as long as you have the right tools, you can get it done. You don't need an engineer. The last thing is the boiler and pressure vessel guide. Everybody should know about this if they do plumbing or HVAC. Basically, anything in here needs to have a boiler certification. There are people in the state that are certified, that are licensed to certify boilers. So anytime you've got a boiler or pressure vessel, it needs to be certified, unless, right, if it's a boiler for hot water supply, then if it's less than 120 gallons or 200,000 BTUs input, then it doesn't have to be certified. A water heater, same thing, less than 120 gallons or 200,000 BTUs input. And then pressure vessels for like air, if it's less than 8 cubic feet or 175 psi set pressure. Potable water, if it's no steam coils, less than 300 psi. Any pressure vessel that's less than 120 gallons. All those don't have to be certified. Anything else is supposed to be certified. This is another one of those things that's kind of hit or miss. Just because you put in a 150-gallon water heater and the inspector didn't ask for the certification doesn't mean it shouldn't have been done. But if you ever wondered why there's so many 199,000 BTU boilers or water heaters, why the tankless water heaters stop at 199,000 BTUs, it's because this is a very common requirement. Things need to be less than 200,000 BTUs, or you have to get that thing looked at every few years by a boiler inspector. It might even be every year. It's been a while since I did a job that needed one. But yeah, if the pressure vessel falls under this, you have to have a certified boiler inspector look at it. Otherwise, it's not required, and that's where this comes from. So you should know that in case it ever comes up, you understand it's a thing. And you can get a hold of, I want to say it's the Department of Housing and Community Development. They keep somebody in the code department, usually does too, keeps a list of certified boiler inspectors if you ever need one, so that you can hunt down someone's number and get them to look at it. There's not that many. I don't know if it's a good thing to get into. I don't know how many times it actually gets done, but yeah, they keep a list for you in case you got to call somebody to do it. It's a whole separate certification. But this is when you need it. Anytime you don't meet any of these exemptions. All residential boilers are exempted. Boilers in apartment buildings that have less than 4 units are exempted. And so on and so forth. So that's where that comes from, just so you know. But anyway, I encourage everybody to kind of look through the Uniform Statewide Building Code at least once. Give it a good, cursory look at all the pages and see how it's set up and see what's in it. There are some interesting things in here other than what I just covered, but this is how we get to the international codes. Okay, this is how we end up adopting them, is through the Uniform Statewide Building Code. And again, this is issued by the Department of Housing and Community Development, whereas licensure is obviously the Department of Professional and Occupational Regulation. So DHCD handles the code, DPOR handles the licensing. And there you go. Virginia Uniform Statewide Building Code. There's your crash course.